Hello everyone and welcome to Lesson 10.3B. I've entitled this video, President Madison and the Warhawks. This video is going to cover pages 282 to 284. The election of 1808. Jefferson, following Washington's precedent, made it clear that he would not be a candidate for a third term. The Republicans chose James Madison, father of the Constitution, from Virginia as their candidate. The Federalists hoped that voter anger over the embargo would help them win. They nominated Charles Pinckney. Pinckney carried most of New England, as you can see from the map shown here. But the Federalists gained little support from the other regions. Madison won the presidency with 122 electoral votes. Pinckney received just 47 votes. And once again, you can see the Federalist Party was clearly a party of the New England states. Question number 1. What precedent that was set by George Washington did President Jefferson continue as president? To not run for a third term, to only serve 2 terms or 8 years in office. Question 2. Who was the father of the Constitution who won the election of 1808? That was James Madison. War at home and abroad. James Madison took office as president under unfavorable conditions. The nation was involved in the embargo crisis, and Britain continued to halt American ships. Cries for war with Britain grew louder. War looms. In 1810, Congress passed a new trade law. It would permit direct trade with either France or Britain, depending on which country first lifted its trade restrictions or limits against the United States. The British took no action, but Napoleon acted quickly, promising to end France's trade restrictions. In spite of that promise, the French continued to seize and sell American ships. On the verge of war, Americans were divided only over who the enemy should be. Although angry over French actions, Madison believed Britain was the bigger threat to the United States. Question number 3. How are things looking for America when James Madison took over as president? Well, he took over during some challenging times here. We had the embargo crisis we were still dealing with, and Britain was continuing to seize our ships. And Americans wanted action. Question number 4. What law did Congress pass in 1810 to try to solve our country's issues with Britain and France? It said, we will trade with either Britain or France, whichever country first lifts their trade restrictions against us. So, if you scratch our backs, we'll scratch yours. Question number 5. In 1810, why did it seem more likely that the United States would go to war with Britain than with France? Well, because France lifted their trade restrictions, and so they sort of blinked first, if you will. They took our deal and said, sure, we'll do that. And so at that point, they seemed a slightly less enemy than Britain, and James Madison believed Britain was the bigger threat. So President Madison thought Britain was the bigger threat, and France did promise to end their trade restrictions. So definitely war with Britain was going to be more likely than war with France. Broken treaties. Madison also received news about problems in the West. Ohio had become a state in 1803. White settlers wanted more land in the Ohio River Valley. Native Americans had already given up millions of acres. Now the settlers were moving onto lands that were guaranteed to Native Americans by treaty, which is something we've seen over and over again. As tensions grew, some Native Americans renewed their contacts with British agents and fur traders in Canada. Other Native Americans pursued a new strategy. Tecumseh, a powerful Shawnee chief, tried to build a confederacy among Native American nations in the Northwest. Tecumseh wanted to halt white movement into Native American lands. He believed that a strong alliance, with the backing of the British in Canada, could achieve that goal. Tecumseh also thought the treaties the U.S. government made with individual Native American nations were worthless. Quote, "The Great Spirit gave this great island to his red children," he said. No one nation, he believed, had the right to take it away. Working alongside Tecumseh was his brother, here we go, let's try to pronounce this correctly, Tenskwatawa. Known as the Prophet, Tenskwatawa urged Native Americans to return to their ancient customs. His message gained a large following. He founded Prophetstown in northern Indiana, near where the Tippecanoe and Wabash rivers meet. I'm sure I butchered that name. I did the best I could. Question number 6. What challenges were facing President Madison in the state of Ohio? Well, he was getting all sorts of pressure. One, white settlers from America were breaking our treaties with the Native Americans and moving onto the lands that we had already promised to let the Native Americans have. So our settlers were breaking treaties. In response, Native American groups obviously were angry, and so they were starting to become friendlier with the British people and the fur traders in Canada. And Tecumseh was starting to try to build a group of Native American nations to respond to our invading of their lands. Question number 7. How did Tecumseh try to fight back against the Americans who were moving into Native American lands? His thought was, let me build a group of Native American nations in the Northwest, and together, united, we can push back on these American settlers who are improperly moving into our lands. Question number 8. What role did, quote, the prophet play at that time in history? And I can say the word prophet much easier than his real name. So the prophet, his thought was, you know what, let's stop our ties with these white invaders. Let's go back to our more traditional ways of life. And so he was getting his Native American brothers and sisters to sort of unite with his cause, to join with Tecumseh in response to these white settlers who were invading their lands. Tecumseh meets the governor. The governor of the Indiana Territory, William Henry Harrison, who will be a future president of the United States, became alarmed by the growing power of the two Shawnee brothers. Fearing that they would form an alliance with the British, Harrison sent Tecumseh a letter. He warned Tecumseh that the United States had more warriors than all the Native American groups combined. Tecumseh replied to Harrison in person. Primary source from the Centennial History of Oregon, 1811 to 1912 by Joseph Gaston. Quote, since the peace was made, you have killed some Shawnees, Delawares, and Winnebagos. You have taken land from us, and I do not see how we can remain at peace if you continue to do so. You try to force red people to do some injury. It is you that are pushing them on to some mischief. You try to prevent the Indians from doing as they wish, to unite and let them consider their lands common property of the whole. Question number 9. Who was the governor of the Indiana Territory at that time and future president of the United States? William Henry Harrison. Question 10. In his letter, what did William Henry Harrison try to do to Tecumseh? He was trying to bully him. He was trying to say, hey, we have clearly more people than you, so you just better give us what we want. The Battle of Tippecanoe. Harrison attacked Prophetstown, shown on the map, while Tecumseh was away trying to expand the Confederacy. After more than 2 hours of battle, the Prophet's forces fled. The Battle of Tippecanoe was a victory for the Americans, yet it came at a cost. After his people's defeat, Tecumseh joined forces with the British who, settlers believed, had supplied his confederacy with guns. Question number 11. What happened at the Battle of Tippecanoe? Well, William Henry Harrison attacked and was successful in scattering the Prophet's forces, so it was an American victory. However, it did force Tecumseh into realizing, okay, it's time to officially join forces with the British. And that is question 12. The decision that Tecumseh made, he joined forces with the British, and now it was official. Tecumseh's forces and the British would work together against the American settlers. The Warhawks call for war. Meanwhile, President Madison faced demands for a more aggressive policy toward Britain. The loudest voices came from a group of young Republican Congress members known as the Warhawks, led by Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. They represented the West and South. The Warhawks supported increases in military spending and were driven by hunger for land. Warhawks from the West wanted the fertile forest of southern Canada, whereas the Southerners wanted Spanish Florida. The Warhawks also wanted to expand the nation's power. Their nationalism, or loyalty to their country, appealed to a renewed American patriotism. Not everyone, however, wanted war. The Federalists in the Northeast remained strongly opposed to it. Question number 13. Who was the leading Warhawk from the state of Kentucky? That would be Henry Clay. Question 14. Who was the leading Warhawk from the state of South Carolina? John C. Calhoun. Question 15. What were two things the Warhawks wanted America to do? They wanted America to increase the military spending, and they wanted more land for our country. Question 16. What lands did the Warhawks from the West want? They wanted the forest of southern Canada. Question 17. What lands did the Warhawks from the South want? They wanted Spanish Florida. Question 18. What does the word nationalism mean? Nationalism is loyalty or love for one's country. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. Patriotism is very good. However, sometimes nationalism can be taken to the extreme, and you can make excuses to do bad things in the name of nationalism. That's how Hitler was able to get Germany to do the horrible things he did in World War II, by getting them to appeal to extreme nationalism. So nothing wrong with loving your country, but when you take it to the extreme, that's when it can be dangerous. Question 19. What group of Americans were against the war fever that the Warhawks were spreading? Well, that group was the Federalists, because they realized that spreading our country into the West and South was going to further give more power to the Democratic Republican Party, and so they were definitely against this kind of action. The eve of war. By the spring of 1812, Madison knew he could no longer avoid war with Britain. In a message to Congress on June 1st, Madison asked for a declaration of war. The British had already decided to end their policy of search and seizure of American ships. Unfortunately, news of Britain's change of policy did not reach Washington, D.C. until it was too late. Once set in motion, the war machine could not be stopped. Question 20. What did President Madison ask Congress to do on June 1st, 1812? He asked Congress for a declaration of war. In our system of government, under our Constitution, the Congress has the power to declare war. Once we have war, then the President is the Commander-in-Chief, but we have separated that power so that the President can't declare war and then also run it. That keeps our President from being a dictator. Here's an example where, had communication been better, maybe this war wouldn't have happened, because Britain had agreed to already stop their policy of searching and seizing our ships, but because news back then took a while to spread, there was no such thing as the internet, we didn't get the word until it was too late, and once war has been declared, it's kind of hard to stop. Well, thank you for watching. I don't have a meme for you today instead, because it is the end of a presidency. I'm just going to review. So this is the end of the Thomas Jefferson presidency, and of all the presidents we've had, he comes in ranked as the 7th greatest president we've ever had. So that's pretty impressive. He was the Declaration of Independence man. He did a lot of amazing things, the Louisiana Purchase, and he comes in as the 7th greatest president of all time. And now it's time for a new president in James Madison. Well, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.